Part 1. The Signal. The stars had always been silent. For 300 years, humanity had reached out into the darkness, sending signals and probes and prayers into the void. They had found nothing. No answers, no friends, no enemies, just endless, empty space. Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USV Defiance watching the stars through the main viewport. The ship was old but strong, built in the orbital shipyards of Mars during a time when humans still believed they might find someone out there. Now, most people had given up hope. The Defiance and its sister ships patrolled the borders of human space more out of habit than necessity. "Quiet night," said Lieutenant Commander Lisa Grant from her station at the communications array. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and quick hands, and she had served with Jake for nearly a decade. Jake nodded. Every night was quiet. That was the problem. The United Earth Defense Fleet consisted of 17 ships in this sector, all of them running the same patrol routes they had run for years. The crew called it the Long Watch. Nothing ever happened. Nothing ever changed. Until tonight. The first sign was a flicker on Lisa's console, a tiny blip of data that should not have existed. She frowned and leaned closer, adjusting the frequency filters. The blip became a pulse. The pulse became a pattern. "Commander," she said, her voice suddenly tight. "I'm picking up something strange." Jake walked over to her station. On the screen, a waveform danced and twisted in ways that no natural phenomenon could produce. It was structured. It was deliberate. It was a signal. "That's not one of ours," Jake said. "No, sir. It's not human at all." The bridge fell silent. Every officer stopped what they were doing and turned to look. After 3 centuries of silence, something was finally talking back. Lisa worked quickly, running the signal through every translation algorithm they had. Most of them failed, but one, a theoretical program designed by scientists who had never expected it to work, began to produce results. The signal was a distress call. The message was fragmented and broken, clearly sent by beings who were desperate and afraid. Lisa pieced it together word by word, and when she finally read it aloud, her hands were shaking. "They call themselves the Veloxi. They say they are under attack. Their colony on a moon called Cathara is being destroyed. They are begging for help from anyone who can hear them." Jake stared at the screen. Aliens. Real aliens. And they were dying. "Who is attacking them?" he asked. Lisa scrolled through more data. "Something called the Drakari Dominion. The Veloxi say they have conquered dozens of worlds. They show no mercy. They take no prisoners." The bridge was silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. Every person in that room understood what this moment meant. First contact with alien life, and it had come as a cry for help. Jake thought about his orders. He was supposed to patrol the border and report any unusual activity. He was supposed to wait for instructions from Earth Command. He was supposed to follow protocol. But the signal kept playing, and in the static, he could hear the fear of beings who had never met a human, who had no reason to believe anyone would come, but who were calling out anyway because hope was all they had left. "How far is Cathara?" Jake asked. 14 hours at maximum speed," Lisa replied. Jake looked around the bridge at his crew. These were men and women who had trained their whole lives for a moment that most believed would never come. They had families back on Earth. They had futures waiting for them. And none of them looked away. "Contact the rest of the fleet," Jake said. "Tell them to form up on the Defiance. We're changing course." The orders went out within minutes. 17 human warships, built by a species that the galaxy did not know existed, turned toward a distant moon where strangers were dying. They did not ask for permission. They did not wait for politicians to debate. They simply went. Admiral Ben Carter received the transmission 3 hours later at Earth Command. He was an old soldier, gray-haired and tired. and he had spent most of his career preparing for threats that never came. When he read Jake's report, he did not hesitate. "How many ships can we mobilize?" he asked his staff. 42 additional vessels, sir, but it will take time to reach them." "Send them all, every ship we can spare." His aides looked nervous. This was unprecedented. They were about to make contact with not one, but two alien civilizations, and they were going in with weapons hot. "Sir," one of them said carefully, "we don't know anything about these species. We don't know their capabilities. We could be flying into a trap." Admiral Carter stood up and walked to the window. Earth hung in the darkness below, blue and green and beautiful. Billions of people lived on that world, completely unaware that everything was about to change. 300 years ago, he said quietly, "we sent a message into the stars. We told the universe that we were here. We said we came in peace. We asked if anyone was listening." He turned back to his staff. Someone was listening, and now they need our help. If we ignore them, what does that say about us? What does that say about humanity? No one had an answer. "Send the fleet," Admiral Carter ordered, "and pray that we're not too late." Back on the Defiance, Commander Morrison watched the stars blur as the ship jumped to faster-than-light speed. Beside him, Lisa was still monitoring the Veloxy signal, which grew weaker with every passing hour. "They're running out of time," she said. Jake nodded. "Then we'll just have to go faster." The crew worked through the night, pushing the engines beyond their limits, racing toward a battle they did not fully understand against an enemy they had never seen. They were afraid. Any sane person would be, but they were also something else. They were human, and humans did not abandon people in need. As the Defiance led the fleet through the darkness, Jake allowed himself one moment of wonder. After all this time, they were not alone. The universe was full of life, both beautiful and terrible, and humanity was about to introduce itself. The Deathworlders were coming, and they were bringing war. Part 2. First Contact in Fire. The fleet dropped out of faster-than-light speed at the edge of the Cathera system, and for a long moment, no one on the bridge of the Defiance could speak. Debris floated everywhere. Twisted metal and shattered glass drifted through the void like leaves in a dead wind. Commander Jake Morrison recognized the shapes of ships, or what had once been ships, torn apart and left to rot in the darkness. The Veloxy had fought back. They had lost. "How many?" Jake asked quietly. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Grant checked her sensors. "At least 30 vessels, sir, all destroyed. No life signs." The crew absorbed this in silence. 30 ships full of beings they had never met, killed before humanity even knew they existed. It felt like arriving at a funeral for a stranger and realizing you could have saved them if only you had been faster. But the Veloxy signal was still broadcasting, weaker now but still alive. Someone had survived. "The moon," Lisa said, pointing to her screen. "Cathara Prime's fourth moon. That's where the signal is coming from." Jake ordered the fleet forward. As they approached, the full horror of the situation became clear. The Drakari fleet surrounded the moon like a ring of iron. Over 100 warships, each one bristling with weapons, formed a perfect blockade. On the surface below, cities burned. The Drakari were not just defeating the Veloxy, they were erasing them. "Open a channel," Jake ordered. "All frequencies." Lisa nodded and made the connection. Jake stepped forward and spoke clearly into the void. "This is Commander Jake Morrison of the United Earth Defense Fleet. You are attacking a civilian population. Cease your assault immediately and withdraw from this system." The response came quickly. A face appeared on the view screen, reptilian and cold, with scales the color of dried blood and eyes like black stones. The creature smiled, revealing rows of sharp teeth. "I am Fleet Commander Varkos of the Drakari Dominion," it said. "I do not know what Earth is. I do not know what a human is, but I see your tiny ships, and I am amused. Leave now, little creatures, and I will let you live long enough to tell your world what happens to those who interfere with the Dominion." Jake did not blink. "I'm going to give you one more chance to withdraw." Varkos laughed. It was an ugly sound, full of contempt. "You threaten me? With 17 ships against 100? Your species must be very stupid." "We're not stupid," Jake said. "We're just not afraid of you." He cut the channel and turned to his crew. Every face was pale but determined. They knew the odds. They also knew why they had come. "All ships, battle formation," Jake ordered. "Target their lead vessels first. Hit them hard and keep hitting them. Make them feel it." The human fleet surged forward. What happened next would be studied by military historians across the galaxy for centuries. The Drakari had conquered dozens of species, and all of them had fought in similar ways. They used predictable tactics, standard formations, and weapons designed for enemies who thought and moved at normal speeds. Humans were not normal. Earth was a death world, a planet where everything wanted to kill you. The gravity was crushing. The atmosphere was poison to most species. The wildlife was vicious, and the dominant species had survived by becoming the most adaptable, most stubborn, most dangerous creatures their world had ever produced. Human reflexes were 3 times faster than Drakari reflexes. Human ships were built to withstand forces that would tear other vessels apart. Human weapons were designed to punch through the armor of their own war machines, which meant they cut through Drakari shields like they were made of paper. The first Drakari ship exploded before its crew even understood they were under attack. Varkos watched in disbelief as his fleet began to die. These tiny ships, these unknown creatures, were tearing through his forces like predators through prey. Every tactic he tried failed. Every formation he ordered was broken. The humans did not fight like any species he had ever encountered. They fought like they had nothing to lose. On the Defiance, Jake coordinated the battle with cold precision. He had trained for this his entire life, running simulations against imaginary enemies that could never match the real thing. But his instincts were sharp, and his crew was flawless. "Port batteries, target that cruiser. Starboard batteries, cover the Valor. Launch fighters to intercept their bombers." The orders flowed like water, and the fleet responded as one. Beside him, Lisa monitored enemy communications. "They're panicking, sir. They've never seen anything like us." "Good," Jake said. "Let them panic." The battle raged for 4 hours. Ships died on both sides, but the toll was uneven. For every human vessel lost, the Drakari lost 3, then 5, then 10. Finally, with his fleet reduced to barely 60 ships, Varkos made a decision. He ordered a full retreat, but Jake was not finished. "Pursuit course," he ordered. "Don't let them regroup." The human fleet chased the Drakari across the system, picking off stragglers and crippling engines. By the time Varkos's flagship was finally surrounded, he had less than 20 ships left. "You can surrender now," Jake broadcast. "Or you can die. Choose." Varkos chose to surrender. He was brought aboard the Defiance in chains, his scales dull with shock, his arrogance completely shattered. He stared at Jake like he was looking at a monster. "What are you?" he whispered. Jake leaned close. "We're human. Remember that name." With the Drakari fleet broken, the human ships turned their attention to the moon below. The Veloxi survivors emerged from their shelters slowly, their insectoid bodies trembling with fear and hope. They had sent a message into the void expecting nothing. Instead, they had been saved by creatures from a world they had never heard of. Dr. Marie Chen, the fleet's xenolinguist, was the first human to speak with the Veloxi directly. She used a combination of translated signals and simple gestures, and what she learned broke her heart. The Veloxi had been a peaceful species. They had no military, no weapons, no concept of war. The Drakari had attacked them simply because they were weak and their worlds were valuable. Nearly 2 million Veloxi had survived on this moon. They were all that remained of their entire civilization. "Help is here," Marie told them gently. "You're safe now." The Veloxi did not fully understand her words, but they understood her meaning. For the first time in months, they stopped running. They stopped hiding. And they began, slowly, to hope again. Back on the Defiance, Jake stood alone on the bridge, looking out at the stars. They had won the battle, but he knew this was only the beginning. The Drakari Dominion was vast and powerful. They would not forget this defeat. They would come back with more ships and more anger. But humanity would be ready. Lisa approached him quietly. "Earth Command is requesting a full report, sir. They want to know what happens next." Jake smiled grimly. "What happens next is that we introduce ourselves to the galaxy, and we make sure no one ever thinks we're weak." The first battle was over. The war was just beginning. Part 3. The reckoning news traveled fast across the galaxy. Within days of the Battle of Cathera, every species in known space had heard the story. A new civilization had emerged from the dark edges of the galaxy. They called themselves humans, and they had destroyed a Drakari fleet. The Galactic Council held an emergency session on their capital world, a massive space station that floated in neutral territory. Over 200 species sent representatives, filling the great assembly hall with creatures of every shape and size. Some had wings, some had tentacles. Some existed as clouds of gas held together by magnetic fields. But all of them were talking about the same thing. The humans were coming. Ambassador Carla Reyes arrived at the station aboard a diplomatic vessel, escorted by 4 human warships. She was a tall woman with gray hair and steady hands, and she had spent her career preparing for a moment that most believed would never happen. Now it was here, and she intended to make it count. The assembly hall fell silent as she walked to the speaking platform. Thousands of alien eyes watched her with curiosity, fear, and something that might have been hope. "My name is Carla Reyes," she began, speaking clearly into the translation systems. "I represent the United Earth government and the human species. We come in peace, but we are not peaceful by nature. We are the children of a dangerous world, and we have learned to be dangerous in return." Whispers rippled through the crowd. The translators worked overtime. Carla continued. 12 days ago, we received a distress signal from the Veloxi people. They were being exterminated by the Drakari Dominion. We did not know the Veloxi. We had never met them. We had no treaty, no alliance, no obligation to help. But we helped anyway, because that is what humans do. She paused, letting the words sink in. "Now I have a question for this council. The Veloxi sent their distress signal to everyone. Every species in this room could have heard it. Why did none of you respond?" The silence was deafening. Delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. No one wanted to answer. Finally, a representative of the Kalari, a species of tall bird-like beings, spoke up. "The Drakari Dominion is powerful. To oppose them is to invite destruction. We are not warriors. We cannot fight." Carla nodded slowly. "I understand. Your worlds are gentle. Your species evolved without predators, without threats, without the need for violence. You are builders and thinkers and creators. That is admirable." Her voice hardened. "But while you were building and thinking and creating, the Drakari were burning worlds. They were enslaving billions. They were committing genocide. And you did nothing." The Kalari representative looked away. "Humanity will not stand by while innocents are slaughtered," Carla declared. "We do not ask for your help. We do not need your permission. But we wanted you to know. The rules have changed. There is a new power in this galaxy, and we do not tolerate bullies." She stepped down from the platform and walked out of the hall, leaving 200 species to contemplate what they had just witnessed. Far across the galaxy, the Drakari Dominion was having its own emergency meeting. High Command assembled in the war room of their capital planet, a dark and brutal world covered in fortresses and weapons factories. The mood was grim. Fleet Commander Varkos was being held in a human prison, and his defeat had shaken the entire Dominion. "These humans," said Grand Admiral Thezak, the Dominion's supreme military commander, "where did they come from?" His intelligence officers had been working non-stop since the battle. Now they presented their findings, and what they revealed was deeply disturbing. Earth was classified as a Class 7 death world, one of the most dangerous categories in galactic records. The gravity was nearly twice the standard. The atmosphere contained high levels of oxygen, a gas that was toxic to most species. The surface was covered with predators, natural disasters, and extreme weather. By all logic, nothing intelligent should have evolved there, but the humans had evolved anyway. And they had not just survived their world, they had conquered it. "Their history is full of violence," the intelligence officer reported. "They have fought wars among themselves that killed millions. They have created weapons capable of destroying entire cities. They nearly wiped themselves out multiple times, and each time they rebuilt stronger than before." Thezak stared at the data in silence. He was old and experienced, and he had conquered dozens of species in his long career. He knew how to recognize a threat. The humans were a threat. "If we allow them to grow," he said slowly, "they will become unstoppable. Their aggression, their adaptability, their sheer stubbornness will make them the dominant power in the galaxy within a few generations." His generals nodded in agreement. "Then we must strike now," Thezak continued, "before they are ready, before they can build more ships and train more soldiers. We will gather every ship in the Dominion and attack their homeworld directly. We will burn Earth to ashes and end this threat forever." The decision was made. The Drakari began assembling the largest invasion fleet in their history. 500 warships, crewed by the most experienced soldiers in the Dominion, would descend upon Earth and wipe humanity from existence. They expected an easy victory. They did not understand what they were facing. Back on Earth, Admiral Ben Carter received the intelligence reports with a heavy heart. The Drakari were coming, and they were coming in force. Humanity had won the first battle, but the war was about to escalate beyond anything they had imagined. He called a meeting of the Joint Chiefs, the leaders of Earth's military forces. They gathered in a secure bunker deep beneath the surface, surrounded by screens showing data from across human space. "We have 8 months," Carter told them. 8 months before the Drakari fleet reaches our system. 8 months to prepare for the fight of our lives. The generals and admirals looked at each other. 8 months was not much time, but humans had faced worse odds before. "We will need every ship we can build," said General Patricia Hayes. "Every soldier we can train, every weapon we can manufacture." "Then we build," Carter replied. "We train, we manufacture. We turn this planet into a fortress." He stood up and looked around the room. These were the men and women who would lead humanity through its greatest trial. He had to believe they were ready. "The Drakari think we are weak," he said. "They think we are primitives from a backwater world. They think they can crush us with overwhelming force." He smiled, a hard and dangerous smile. "Let them come. Let them learn what it means to attack a death world. Let them discover that humanity does not break." The meeting ended, the preparations began, and across the planet, billions of humans looked up at the stars and prepared for war. Part 4. The Storm Gathers. The factories never stopped. Day and night, week after week, the industrial might of Earth poured itself into a single purpose: survival. Admiral Ben Carter watched the production reports come in from every continent. Shipyards in orbit churned out warships at impossible speeds. Weapons factories on the ground worked triple shifts. Scientists who had competed for funding now worked side by side, sharing every secret and every breakthrough. For the first time in human history, the species was truly united. They had no choice. The Drakari were coming, and divided they would die. Commander Jake Morrison was promoted to Rear Admiral and given command of the Home Defense Fleet. It was the largest military force ever assembled by humanity, and it would be the first line of defense against the invasion. He stood on the bridge of his new flagship, the USV Relentless, watching crews work around the clock to prepare the vessel for battle. The ship was bigger and stronger than the Defiance, built with lessons learned from the Battle of Cathara. Its weapons could punch through any shield. Its armor could withstand any bombardment. It was a killing machine, and Jake intended to use it well. His second-in-command was Captain Kevin Park, a tactical genius from Korea who had written the manual on space combat. Kevin was quiet and thoughtful, the opposite of Jake's aggressive style, and that made them perfect partners. "The Drakari fleet is massive," Kevin said, reviewing the intelligence data. 500 ships, maybe more. Even with our new vessels, we're still outnumbered. Jake nodded. "Then we'll have to be smarter, faster, more ruthless." "We'll also need more than just ships," Kevin pointed out. "We need every advantage we can get." That was where Lieutenant Commander Lisa Grant came in. She had been transferred from the Defiance to command Earth's Orbital Defense Network, a system of weapons satellites that circled the planet like a ring of steel. Each satellite carried enough firepower to destroy a cruiser. Together, they formed an impenetrable wall, or at least, that was the plan. Lisa worked 18-hour days, coordinating engineers and programmers from every nation on Earth. The satellites had been designed for a different kind of war, against human enemies using human technology. Now they had to be upgraded to fight aliens, and there was no room for error. "The Drakari shields are stronger than ours," she told her team, "but they have weaknesses. The energy fluctuates at certain frequencies. If we can tune our weapons to match those frequencies, we can bypass the shields entirely." It was a small advantage, but in war, small advantages added up. Meanwhile, Dr. Marie Chen continued her work with the Veloxi refugees who had followed the human fleet back to Earth. The insectoid aliens were eager to help the species that had saved them, and they brought knowledge that humans desperately needed. "Your shield technology is primitive," said the Veloxi chief scientist, a gentle creature named Zelith who communicated through a combination of clicks and translated speech. "The Drakari have been fighting for thousands of years. They know how to break shields, but we have studied their technology. We can teach you how to make your shields stronger." Marie relayed this information to the engineering teams, and within weeks, human ships were being fitted with upgraded defenses. It was not enough to match the Drakari, but it was better than nothing. Other species began to help as well. Secretly, representatives from a dozen races contacted Earth's government with offers of assistance. They could not fight openly against the Drakari, but they could provide intelligence, resources, and technology. The galaxy was watching, and not everyone wanted the Dominion to win. As the months passed, the human fleet grew. 50 ships became 100. 100 became 200. 300 vessels gathered in Earth's orbit, crewed by men and women who knew they might not survive the coming battle but were determined to fight anyway. On the ground, billions of soldiers trained in the harshest conditions Earth could offer. They ran through deserts and climbed through mountains and fought in simulated battles until their bodies ached and their minds were sharp. The children of the death world prepared to defend their home. Private Danny Lopez was one of them. He was 22 years old, born in a small town in Texas, and he had joined the military because he wanted to see the stars. Now he was training to fight aliens, and he was terrified. But he was also proud. My grandfather fought in the last big war, he told his squad mates during a break in training. He used to say that courage isn't about not being scared. It's about being scared and fighting anyway. His friends nodded. They were all scared, but they were also human, and humans did not run from danger. 2 months before the expected arrival of the Drakari fleet, Admiral Carter called a final strategy meeting. Every senior officer in the Defense Force attended, either in person or via holographic link. Intelligence reports indicate the Drakari are on schedule, Carter began. They will enter our system in approximately 60 days. Their fleet consists of 500 warships, including heavy carriers, battleships, and assault transports. Their commander is Grand Admiral Thezak, the best strategist in the Dominion. The officers absorbed this information grimly. Our fleet consists of 312 combat-ready vessels, Carter continued. We also have the Orbital Defense Network, ground-based missile batteries, and fighter squadrons stationed on every continent. Additionally, we have something the Drakari do not expect: us. He pulled up a display showing Earth, blue and green and beautiful against the darkness of space. The Drakari think they are attacking a primitive world. They think we are weak and disorganized and easy to break. They have never fought a species like us. They do not understand what it means to be a Deathworlder. He looked around the room at the faces of his officers. These were the people who would lead humanity through its darkest hour. He had to believe in them. We will not meet them at the edge of the system, Carter announced. We will let them come to us. We will draw them into range of our orbital defenses and hit them from every direction at once. It will be bloody. It will be brutal. But we will win, because we have no other choice. The meeting ended. The preparations continued. And 60 days later, when the Drakari fleet finally dropped out of faster-than-light speed at the edge of the solar system, they found a world that was ready for them. Earth hung in the darkness like a jewel, surrounded by a ring of steel. 300 human warships formed a defensive line, their weapons charged and their crews at battle stations. Behind them, the orbital satellites hummed with deadly energy. On the bridge of the USV Relentless, Rear Admiral Jake Morrison looked at the incoming enemy fleet and smiled. "Let them come," he said quietly. "We're ready." The storm had arrived, and humanity was waiting. Part 5. War. The battle for Earth began at exactly 0600 hours Coordinated Universal Time. Grand Admiral Thezak stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Dominator, watching the human world grow larger on his view screen. 500 Drakari warships advanced in perfect formation, a wave of destruction that had crushed dozens of civilizations before. Today, it would crush one more. "Their fleet is smaller than I expected," Thezak said to his officers. "Perhaps they could not build as many ships as they hoped. Perhaps their courage has failed them." His officers laughed. The humans were outnumbered nearly 2 to 1. This would be a slaughter. But as the Drakari fleet approached, something strange happened. The human ships did not retreat. They did not scatter. They held their line and waited, silent and still, like predators watching their prey walk into a trap. Thezak hesitated. Something felt wrong. On the USV Relentless, Rear Admiral Jake Morrison gave the order. "All ships engage!" The human fleet surged forward. What happened next was unlike anything Thezak had ever experienced. The humans did not fight like the other species the Dominion had conquered. They did not use cautious tactics or defensive formations. They attacked with a ferocity that bordered on madness, throwing themselves at the Drakari lines like wolves tearing into a herd. Human reflexes were faster. Human weapons were more accurate. Human crews operated with a coordination that seemed almost telepathic, anticipating each other's moves and covering each other's weaknesses. The first Drakari battleship exploded within minutes of the engagement, then another, then 3 more. "Return fire!" Thezak roared. "All ships, concentrate on their lead vessels!" The Drakari weapons lashed out, and human ships began to die. The USV Valor was hit by a concentrated barrage and broke apart. The USV Defiant lost its engines and drifted helplessly. Explosions bloomed in the darkness like terrible flowers, but the humans kept coming. On the Relentless, Jake coordinated the battle with calm precision. Beside him, Captain Kevin Park directed squadron movements while Lieutenant Commander Lisa Grant monitored the orbital defense network from her station on Earth. "We're taking heavy losses," Kevin reported. 62 ships destroyed, another 40 damaged. Jake nodded grimly. "What about them?" Kevin checked his data. "Over 100 Drakari ships down. Their formation is breaking." "Good. Keep the pressure on. Don't give them time to regroup." The battle raged across the solar system. Human fighters swarmed around the larger Drakari vessels, targeting engines and weapon systems. Bombers made suicide runs against enemy carriers, sacrificing themselves to take out ships 10 times their size. On the ground, Lisa activated the orbital defense network, and massive kinetic rounds rained down on the Drakari fleet like thunderbolts from an angry god. The Drakari had never faced anything like this. Their enemies were supposed to be weak and frightened. These humans were neither. Grand Admiral Thezak watched his fleet being torn apart and felt something he had not felt in decades: fear. "We underestimated them," he whispered. His officers said nothing. They were too busy trying to stay alive. The battle lasted for 3 days. On the first day, the Drakari pushed deep into the solar system, trading ships for distance. They reached the orbit of Mars before the human counterattack forced them back. On the second day, the fighting became desperate. Thezak threw everything he had at the human lines, trying to break through to Earth. He failed. For every ship that got through, 10 more were destroyed. On the third day, the Drakari fleet finally broke. It happened slowly at first. A few ships turned and ran, then a few more. Then entire squadrons abandoned the battle, fleeing toward the edge of the system. Thezak screamed orders at them, threatened them, begged them to fight. But it was no use. His warriors had seen enough death. The mighty Drakari Dominion was running away. Jake Morrison did not let them go. "All ships, pursuit formation," he ordered. "Hunt them down." The human fleet chased the Drakari across 3 systems, picking off stragglers and destroying supply ships. By the time the Dominator was finally cornered, Thezak had less than 50 ships left. "Surrender," Jake broadcast across all frequencies. "Surrender now, and your surviving crews will be treated with dignity. Continue fighting, and you will all die." Thezak sat in his command chair for a long moment, staring at the view screen. His entire life had been about conquest, about domination, about proving the superiority of the Drakari over all other species. Now he was surrounded by creatures from a death world, and they were offering him mercy. He accepted. The Grand Admiral was brought to Earth in chains, the first Drakari leader ever captured by an enemy force. He stood before the human commanders and looked at them with something close to respect. "We were wrong about you," he said quietly. "We thought you were primitives. We thought you were prey." Jake Morrison stepped forward. "We're humans. We don't prey on others, but we protect those who can't protect themselves. And we never, ever give up." Thezak nodded slowly. "I understand now. Your world made you strong, your history made you fierce, and your hearts made you noble." He bowed his head. "The Dominion will fall. Without me, without our fleet, the conquered worlds will rise up. The Empire is finished." He was right. Within months, the Drakari Dominion collapsed. Species that had been enslaved for generations threw off their chains and declared independence. Worlds that had lived in fear finally knew peace, and everywhere, people told stories about the humans who had appeared from nowhere and defeated the greatest military power in the galaxy. The Galactic Council invited Earth to become a full member, the first time in history they had offered such status to a new species. Ambassador Carla Reyes accepted on behalf of humanity, and the assembly hall erupted in applause from 200 different worlds. "We are honored to join you," Carla said in her acceptance speech. "We ask only one thing in return. Never again will innocents cry for help while the galaxy looks away. From this day forward, when someone is in danger, someone will answer." The council agreed. And from that day on, whenever a distress signal echoed through the stars, ships from a dozen species would respond. The humans had taught the galaxy that courage was contagious. Back on Earth, the celebrations lasted for weeks. Soldiers returned home to their families, ships were repaired and upgraded, the dead were honored with monuments and memories. Private Danny Lopez from Texas survived the battle and went on to become one of the most decorated officers in human history. Admiral Ben Carter retired with honors and wrote a book about the war that became required reading in schools across the planet. Dr. Marie Chen continued her work with alien species and eventually led the first interspecies university. Captain Kevin Park took command of the Relentless and spent decades patrolling the galaxy, protecting the weak and deterring the strong. And Rear Admiral Jake Morrison, the commander who had answered the first distress call, returned to the stars where he belonged. He never stopped watching, never stopped waiting, never stopped believing that somewhere out there, someone might need help. Years later, when historians looked back on this period, they called it the Awakening. It was the moment when humanity stepped out of the shadows and claimed its place among the stars. The moment when a species born on a world of death and danger chose to become guardians instead of conquerors. The Veloxi, the people humanity had saved at Cathara, became their closest allies. The two species built colonies together, traded knowledge together, and explored the unknown together. The insectoid aliens never forgot what the humans had done for them. And across the galaxy, whenever a distress signal echoed through the void, other species would whisper the same words to each other, words that had become a promise and a hope. "Hold on. The humans are coming. The end."